November 23, 1943. 12,000 feet above Saint-Nazaire, France. 13:47 hours. Hauptmann Egon Meyer, 26, Jagdgeschwader 2 Richthofen, lined up his Focke-Wulf 190 for a head-on attack against a formation of B-17 flying fortresses. 24 American bombers flew in tight combat box formation. Meyer had already shot down 78 aircraft. 2 B-17s earlier that morning brought his total to 80 German fighter pilots called the American bomber formations Polks, herds. From a distance, they looked slow, vulnerable. Early Luftwaffe tactics said attack from behind, where closing speed was manageable. But Meyer noticed something his fellow pilots missed. Those tail positions bristled with Browning M250 caliber machine guns. Attack from behind and you flew into a wall of lead. What Luftwaffe command didn't understand yet was that American bombers weren't just carrying bombs. They were flying gun platforms. 36 bombers in formation meant 468 50 caliber machine guns. Overlapping fields of fire. Interlocking coverage. Every approach angle covered by multiple guns. Meyer developed the head-on attack to avoid that firepower. Fly straight at the bomber's nose where defensive armament was lightest. Close at 500 miles per hour combined speed. Fire cannons. Break away. Before American gunners could track you, you were gone. It worked. For a while. Until American engineers added more guns. What happened over the skies of Europe would teach the Luftwaffe a brutal lesson. Underestimate American defensive firepower, and you paid with your life. By late 1943, the air war over Europe had reached a critical phase. The 8th Air Force was conducting daylight precision bombing missions deep into Germany. Strategic targets, ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, aircraft plants at Regensburg, oil refineries across the Ruhr Valley. American doctrine said heavy bombers could fight their way to the target without fighter escort. The B-17 earned its name Flying Fortress for good reason. 1350 caliber machine guns on the late models. Positions covering every angle. Nose, chin, cheek, top turret, ball turret, waist guns, tail. Bombers flew in combat box formations specifically designed to create overlapping defensive fire zones. Luftwaffe fighter pilots who'd cut their teeth against lightly armed. Soviet bombers on the Eastern Front thought American bombers would be similar. Big, slow targets. Easy kills if you pressed the attack hard enough. The first missions in late 1942 and early 1943 taught them otherwise. When German fighters approached B-17 formations, every gunner who had a sight picture opened fire. Not aimed fire necessarily, defensive fire. Tracers marking the sky. Every fifth round in the belt was tracer ammunition. Gunners learned that if you filled the space ahead of an attacking fighter with enough lead, the fighter pilot faced a choice. Press the attack through the fire or break off. Most broke off. The ones who didn't sometimes didn't survive. The Browning M250 caliber machine gun wasn't designed as an aircraft weapon initially. John Browning developed it in 1918 for ground use. But the aviation version, designated AN-M2, became standard armament for American aircraft. Rate of fire approximately 800 rounds per minute. Muzzle velocity 2,900 feet per second. Effective range over a mile. The ammunition made the difference. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds could defeat nearly an inch of face-hardened steel at 200 yards. German fighters had armor protecting the pilot. But engine cowlings, fuel lines, hydraulic systems, control surfaces, all vulnerable. One AP round through a fuel line and the fighter was streaming gasoline. One incendiary hit and flames followed. A single B-17 carried approximately 5,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. 13 guns, different loadouts per position. Ball turret gunner had about 500 rounds per gun. Waist gunners 500 to 600 per gun. Tail gunner 500 rounds per gun. Top turret had the most, sometimes 800 rounds per gun. That's enough sustained fire for several attack runs. Multiply that by 36 bombers in a combat box formation. Do the mathematics. Over 180,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition in one formation. Every gun capable of 13 rounds per second. If a German fighter entered the defensive fire zone and multiple gunners engaged simultaneously, the volume of fire was staggering. German pilots began developing respect for American defensive firepower quickly. Hauptmann Wolf Dietrich Wilke, commander of JG-3, wrote in his after-action report after attacking a B-17 formation in January 1943. Approaching from the rear is like trying to make love to a porcupine that is on fire. That quote circulated among Luftwaffe squadrons. It was both joke and warning. American bombers concentrated their heaviest defensive firepower to the rear. Tail gunner position with twin 50s had the clearest field of fire. No friendly aircraft blocking the view. German fighters approaching from 6 o'clock faced those guns plus the ball turret guns, waist guns, and sometimes top turret guns tracking them. Tail gunners accounted for nearly half of all German fighters claimed destroyed by bomber defensive fire. The ball turret gunner came second. That position, suspended in a glass sphere underneath the fuselage, had 360-degree field of fire on the lower hemisphere. Luftwaffe pilots attacking from below found themselves in that gunner's crosshairs immediately. The effectiveness of bomber defensive fire was difficult to measure accurately. Gunners often claimed more kills than German records confirmed. In the chaos of air combat, multiple gunners would engage the same fighter. It would trail smoke, dive away. 3 different gunners would claim the kill. Post-war analysis showed American bomber gunners often overclaimed by factors of 8 to 1 or higher. But even accounting for overclaims, the defensive firepower was real. German fighter losses to bomber defensive fire were significant enough that Luftwaffe tactics evolved specifically to counter it. That's where Egon Mayer's innovation came in. If the rear was too heavily defended, attack from the front. Early B-17 models had minimal nose armament, just single hand-held 50-caliber guns operated by the bombardier and navigator. Easy to evade if you came in fast and broke away before they could aim effectively. Mayer first tested the frontal attack tactic in November 1942. He approached a straggling B-17 head-on, opened fire with his 420mm cannons at 800 meters, observed hits in the starboard wing and fuselage, broke away vertically. The B-17 went down. Mayer landed, analyzed what he'd done, and realized this worked better than rear attacks. Closing speed was too fast for effective mutual engagement. The B-17's nose armament couldn't match a fighter's concentrated firepower. He shared the tactic. Other Jagdgeschwader adopted it. By early 1943, German fighters were routinely making head-on passes at American bomber formations. They'd form up ahead of the bomber stream, turn to face the oncoming bombers, and attack in waves. 4 or 5 fighters abreast, cannons blazing, passing through the formation in seconds. It was devastatingly effective. American losses spiked. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raids in August 1943 cost the 8th Air Force 60 B-17s in a single day. Many fell to frontal attacks. Luftwaffe pilots reported that American nose gunners, usually the bombardier and navigator using handheld guns, couldn't track targets effectively at 500 miles per hour closing speed. But the Americans weren't ignoring the problem. Boeing and the Army Air Forces analyzed combat losses, interviewed returning crews, studied bullet hole patterns in damaged aircraft. The data was clear. Nose section taking heavy damage. Pilots and co-pilots being wounded or lost to frontal cannon fire. The B-17's weakest defensive arc was straight ahead. The solution arrived with the B-17G model, which entered service in September 1943. A powered chin turret mounted under the nose. Twin 50-caliber guns remotely operated by the bombardier. The turret could track targets from level to 90 degrees down, with 30 degrees traverse left and right. Now frontal attacks faced 2 guns that could lead a target accurately. The B-24 Liberator got similar upgrades. The B-24H model added a nose turret with twin 50s. Both bombers now had effective defensive fire coverage on all approach angles. German pilots noticed immediately. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, 206 Victories, wrote in October 1943, "The Americans have added nose guns to their fortresses. Frontal attacks now face fire discipline we did not expect. 3 of our squadron did not return today. All were last seen pressing frontal attacks. Hans Philipp didn't survive much longer. He was lost over Brunswick on October 8, 1943. Official cause: lost in aerial combat. Witnesses reported he was attacking a B-17 formation from the front when his fighters suddenly tumbled out of control. Whether from defensive fire or structural failure under stress, no one knows. But the timing corresponds with the arrival of B-17Gs, with chin turrets in theater. The mathematics of combat box formations became genuinely terrifying for German fighter pilots. 36 B-17Gs meant 468 50-caliber guns, every single one capable of 800 rounds per minute. In theory, if every gun in a formation fired simultaneously, that's 6,240 rounds per second. Obviously, that never happened. Guns jammed. Gunners couldn't all acquire targets simultaneously. Fields of fire overlapped but didn't perfectly align. But German pilots didn't do mathematics in the moment. They saw tracers. Lots of tracers. Every fifth round glowing, which meant 4 invisible rounds for every visible one. The visual effect was streams of fire crisscrossing the sky. Fly through that, and you were betting your life on luck. Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland, fighter commander and decorated ace, later wrote that attacking American bomber formations required courage bordering on fatalism. Pilots who survived multiple engagements with B-17 formations described the experience as flying through a metal storm. The defensive fire forced German fighters to modify tactics constantly. If frontal attacks became too costly, try beam attacks from the side. If beam attacks faced too many waist gunners, try vertical attacks from above or below. Each approach had strengths and weaknesses. Each faced different defensive gun positions. American gunners trained extensively. Gunnery schools taught deflection shooting, how to lead a target, how to calculate closure rates, how to manage ammunition, not spray and pray, controlled bursts, short trigger pulls, track the target, fire when you had a good lead, conserve ammunition for multiple engagements. The reality of combat made textbook gunnery difficult. Bombers flew at 25,000 feet, temperatures 40 degrees below zero. Gunners wore electrically heated suits that sometimes failed. Frostbite was common. Hypoxia from oxygen system failures happened. And you were fighting in a machine that shook from turbulence, prop wash from other bombers, and flak explosions. Waist gunners had perhaps the hardest job. They stood at open windows, wind screaming past at 180 miles per hour, manning handheld 50-caliber guns. No powered traverse, just muscle. Each gun weighed 64 pounds empty. With ammunition, the weight increased. Hold that gun steady while tracking a fighter making a high-speed pass, lead it correctly, fire controlled bursts, all while wearing bulky flight gear and oxygen mask, and yet they did it. Mission after mission. The kill claims were often exaggerated. Post-war analysis confirmed that. But the psychological effect was real. German fighter pilots knew that every attack run risked getting hit. The bombers weren't helpless. They fought back. Hard. By February 1944, the dynamics shifted again. The arrival of P-51 Mustang long-range escort fighters gave bombers protection all the way to targets deep in Germany. Now Luftwaffe fighters faced a two-front problem. Attack the bombers, risk defensive fire. But P-51s would dive on you while you were focused on the bombers. Get bounced by Mustangs, and your survival chances dropped dramatically. The week of February 20th to 25, 1944, called Big Week by American forces, marked the turning point. The 8th Air Force launched massive raids with full fighter escort. Luftwaffe came up to fight. The combination of P-51 escort and bomber defensive fire devastated German fighter formations. The Luftwaffe lost approximately one-third of its available fighter aircraft that week. Pilot casualties were worse. Experienced pilots lost could not be replaced. After Big Week, German fighter pilots faced an impossible choice. Don't attack the bombers and let them destroy German industry. Attack the bombers and face both defensive fire and escort fighters. Either way, losses mounted. The 50-caliber defensive guns didn't win the air war alone. The P-51 escort fighters deserve significant credit. But the Browning M2 made every bombing mission a costly proposition for the Luftwaffe. German fighters couldn't simply bounce the bombers and expect easy kills. Each attack meant risk. Egon Meyer, the pilot who pioneered frontal attacks, died March 2, 1944. Shot down during a combat mission against American bombers. He'd achieved 102 confirmed victories, making him one of the most successful aces on the Western Front. Official records say he was lost in aerial combat with P-47 Thunderbolts. Some accounts suggest bomber defensive fire damaged his aircraft first, making him vulnerable to the P-47s. The truth died with him. But his tactic, the frontal attack, became progressively less effective after the B-17G and B-24H models arrived with nose turrets. What had been the bomber's weakness became another defended approach. The versatility of the Browning M2 extended beyond bombers. P-47 Thunderbolts carried 850s. P-51 Mustangs carried 6. American fighters used the same ammunition as the bombers. Standardization simplified logistics. A 50 caliber round worked in any M2 variant. Ground crews didn't need different ammunition stocks for different aircraft types. The gun's reliability mattered too. In the extreme cold of high-altitude flight, many weapons systems failed. The AN-M2 kept functioning. Oil formulations prevented freezing. Parts remained operational at 40 below zero. Jams happened, but less frequently than with other weapons. Gunners could clear most jams mid-flight, pull the charging handle, cycle the action, resume firing. German pilots who survived the war and were later interviewed often mentioned American defensive firepower with respect. Not fear exactly, respect. Professional acknowledgement that attacking American bomber formations was dangerous work that required skill, courage, and luck. One Luftwaffe veteran, interviewed in 1977, said the 15-gun B-17G was more dangerous than any single-seat fighter he'd faced. A fighter you could dogfight, outturn it, get on its 6. But a bomber formation was a collective entity. 36 sets of eyes watching for threats. Dozens of guns ready to fire. You couldn't dogfight a formation. You made your pass, fired, and got out. Linger and someone would hit you. The lesson from the 50 caliber defensive armament wasn't about individual marksmanship. Bomber gunners weren't ace fighter pilots. They were ordinary men doing an extraordinarily difficult job under terrible conditions. But collectively their fire created zones of denial. Spaces in the sky where German fighters couldn't operate safely. That's what Luftwaffe Command failed to understand initially. They saw bombers as targets, slow lumbering bomb-carrying targets. What they didn't grasp until combat taught them was that American bombers were also weapons platforms. The defensive armament wasn't an afterthought. It was integral to the strategic bombing campaign's viability. By 1945, the Luftwaffe's daylight fighter force was effectively destroyed. Multiple factors contributed. Fuel shortages, pilot attrition, overwhelming Allied numerical superiority. But bomber defensive fire played its role. Every mission, German fighters paid a price to attack. Over time, that price became unsustainable. Today, the Browning M2 remains in service. More than a century after John Browning designed it, the 50 caliber machine gun equips military forces worldwide. Modern variants have refinements, better materials, improved manufacturing, but the basic design is unchanged. That's a testament to the original engineering. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force, a restored B-17G sits on display. Memphis Belle, perhaps the most famous. Visitors can walk around it, see the gun positions, the ball turret underneath, the waist windows, the tail position. Small placards explain what each gunner faced, the temperatures, the altitude, the attacks. Few visitors fully grasp what it meant. 10 men in an aluminum aircraft flying through flak and fighters, trusting their lives to training, teamwork, and Browning M2 machine guns. The Germans called them flying fortresses with derision at first. By 1944, they called them fortresses with respect. Because the Luftwaffe learned what happens when you underestimate American defensive firepower. You watch your fighters fall. You see your aces die. You realize that those bombers bristling with guns weren't prey. They were something else entirely. Flying fortresses indeed. The next time you hear someone say the bombers couldn't defend themselves, remember this: 36 B-17s in combat box formation, 468 50-caliber machine guns, nearly 200,000 rounds of ammunition, overlapping fields of fire covering every approach angle. Luftwaffe aces mocked American bomber formations until they flew against them. Then they developed tactics to avoid the defensive fire. Then they added armor to their fighters. Then they lost anyway. Because volume of fire matters. Interlocking coverage matters. And 468 guns firing in defense created a metal storm no amount of pilot skill could safely navigate forever. That's what 50-caliber defensive guns did. They turned prey into predators. And the Luftwaffe paid the price for not understanding that until it was too late.